Well, the leaders of Southeast Asian nations say they are deeply concerned about the violence ravaging Myanmar.
In a statement issued at the ongoing ASEAN summit in Indonesia, they condemned a recent attack on a diplomatic convoy delivering humanitarian aid in the country. They urged Myanmar's military leaders to end the violence and hold inclusive peace talks. Myanmar's shadow administration welcomed ASEAN's call for talks, but said it does not trust the military.
The coup leader Min Aung Hlaing has ignored a 5-point consensus designed to end hostilities. ASEAN continues to exclude him from their meetings for failing to end the violence, which has now claimed almost 3,500 lives. For more insight on the ASEAN summit and the challenge the crisis in Myanmar poses the grouping, let's speak now with Associate Professor Simon Tay. He's a chairman of the Singapore Institute of International Affairs. Good morning, Simon. First of all, I want to get your thoughts on what came out of the meeting in regards to Myanmar. I mean, did you get the sense that the leaders were a bit more assertive compared to past summits?
Well, I think that this has been vacillating, but it's always been on the agenda in the sense that Myanmar is a problem that ASEAN owns and is trying its best to address. But I think the context is very different. Here, the theme of Indonesia's chairmanship and this first summit is epicentrum of growth. The polycrisis, all the problems of economy, they are really front and center for the bulk of ASEAN's work and the benefit of ASEAN's people. But this is not to say that Myanmar doesn't flare up. And this recent act of violence against a humanitarian convoy really brings it up, flashing red on the radar scope of many issues in this polycrisis.
Simon, Indonesia's coordinating minister for political, legal and security affairs, Mahfud MD, he said regarding ASEAN, a crisis after crisis is testing our strength as a community, and failure to address them would risk jeopardizing our relevance. But ASEAN isn't really structured to deal with a crisis like Myanmar, is it?
Well, ASEAN's crisis management comes and goes. When there was a cyclone Nargis very badly hit Myanmar years ago, ASEAN did rally and did address that crisis. That was a humanitarian crisis and in the same country. But this is a bit different because here, the parties, despite ASEAN's efforts, will not allow an actual intervention that can really talk to all sides and deal with the heart of the problem, the benefit of the people. And this is what really this violence, this assault on the humanitarian convoy is saying to people, that somebody in that country doesn't even want humanitarian aid to come to them. And that's a bad sign. ASEAN, though, must be tested on its resolve and its efforts, not its solution, because the solution deeply depends on the attitudes of the SAC and others in that country. But the efforts of ASEAN, the continued effort to try, that's the test of ASEAN.
Simon, Myanmar generals remain barred from the summit. Do you think it's a good idea, given that this doesn't seem to have delivered any results so far? Or should they invite the shadow administration to the meetings as an alternative strategy?
Well, I think, Julie, the first step is to actually open conversations with all sides, which the Indonesian chairman and special envoy has said it has done. And this is key. Before you bring any one person to the table, and there can only be one person at the table, you must start to see who really has the legitimacy, the right attitude to be the party to talk to. If you bring too early one side or the other, you're kind of anointing them for what it's worth with ASEAN's legitimacy. And it could end up backfiring because legitimacy then becomes a weapon that one side could use against the other.
Well, moving away from Myanmar, another issue that has long been discussed is a code of conduct for the South China Sea. How do you see progress there?
Well, similarly, this problem is very real, especially for the 4 countries, not all of ASEAN, but the 4 countries that have claims in the seas and then sometimes come up right against them, especially in the Philippines, where I've just visited. I think that this problem does need an overall framework of ASEAN, but each of these 4 countries will start to pursue their own paths. President Marcos of the Philippines, for example, has just gone to America. So each country will pursue their bilateral efforts as well as their group-wide efforts. But in the end, it will depend a lot on China. China has to realize that ASEAN is one of the few groups that still regards it as a strategic partner. It was declared a few years ago, together Australia, America and others are not yet in the same category. And in that sense, in the overall framework of working together in this post-pandemic world with China, China has got to allow a movement on the COC and recognize within ASEAN the diversity of opinions, because some countries, as I said, are really very distant from the idea of a problem in the South China Sea.
And Simon, amid the great power rivalry in the region, how ready is ASEAN member states to respond effectively if an open conflict were to break out in the Indo-Pacific today? I mean, is there anything they can or should they do at this point in time?
Well, Julie, the ASEAN's history has never been of a security alliance. Now, this is developed over the years. One of the reasons I was in Manila just was the meeting of the chiefs of navy. So there are more efforts to help ASEAN military understand each other, but it's still not a defense organization like NATO is in Europe. The region still depends very much on bilateral alliances like the Philippines and Taiwan with the USA. ASEAN, in this sense, is not geared up. It's like a MPV. You know, it's good at moving 10 people around. But if you ask it to run really fast, drive in a straight line at 200 miles an hour to get to a problem and fix it, that probably needs some sort of a sports utility vehicle or an outright sports car. So I know this is a crazy analogy, but ASEAN is good at managing certain things. It's good at taking people forward step by step. The Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership would not have happened without ASEAN. Many things like the ASEAN Regional Forum still have their uses. But if you ask me whether it can solve the most difficult, most urgent questions, this is not what it was designed for. What we have got to show, though, is attention and effort towards these problems, whether it is Myanmar in our own backyard or problems which are wider, such as potential conflict. And I would say the word potential conflict over Taiwan.
Well, if we stay on the positives then, you mentioned the theme being the epicentrum of growth. What are some of the low-hanging fruits that ASEAN is seeing some success in on that front?
Well, we have to see that our region is really starting to wake up from that post-pandemic. I mean, borders have opened and all of us have been traveling a bit too much. But really, the numbers aren't strong. After the first sort of spike after easing lockdowns, most of the region has seen a very soft first quarter. I was in Vietnam. Numbers there are below 3.5%, which is a sharp climb down from the pre-pandemic numbers. And this for a country that has handled the pandemic very well. Similarly, across the region, growth is a bit slow. That's why the epicentrum of growth, rather than the Myanmar conundrum, should be the real focus of ASEAN. ASEAN can move forward with the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. There was recently a huge exhibition in China with many projects that can move ahead as supply chains start to reorganize. Some will align through ASEAN to the America and West. Others can and should continue to link to China. In this sense, I don't think it's misplaced to have some optimism despite the global storm and to think of ASEAN as that multiple or epicentrum of growth.
All right, Simon. Well, I appreciate your insight as always. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Simon Tay, Chairman of the Singapore Institute of International Affairs.